Hello and welcome to another video of the Simplified opening series. In this video, I would like to propose a way to kind of disappoint your French playing opponent. Now, we probably have noticed that these people who play the French defense, they like their structures, they adore their awful light squared bishop. They want to play e6, d5, maybe even c4, block the position and think that they are strategical geniuses. So, yeah, you have that kind of players, and there are quite a few out there. And to prove the fact, they even made poor Anish Giri make a course on it. Well, poor guy, I can just imagine how much suffering he went through while creating that course. So, okay, by now you probably know that my approach to openings is to kind of sabotage my opponents in a way that I don't want to allow them to get what they want out of the opening. So the lines that follow are actually aimed at that, not to allow the French player their favorite types of positions. So after e4, e6, what's the big idea here? Well, we start with the move knight f3, and after d5 we play knight c3. Now this knight tango, white knight tango, has been known for quite a while, and I will say it from the very beginning. There is absolutely no advantage for white in these lines. But that is not the point. We are not trying to get any advantage. We are trying to get the black player out of their comfort zone by enticing them to enter different types of positions, not typical of the French, and positions where black will not be too comfortable. Now, in this position, let's say psychologically speaking, maybe the best part is that the most critical line against this move order is the line with d4. Yeah, but as you will notice, now the position ceases to resemble anything French-like. Then this is completely different to what the French players would be used to. So already the most, let's say the best line for black takes the game away completely from any French structure. Now the hardcore French fan would play the move knight f6, which will lead to one type of French structures, but one where we will see white has a really easy and straightforward plan to follow. So already we are on the good path of simple middle game play. And the third type of French players would be the Rubinstein French players, and they would simply take on e4, and after knight e4 would play knight d7 with the idea of knight f6, and trying to transpose to their favorite Rubinstein positions. Now, these are the main options that black has as early as move 3. I would only mention c5, which is not a very good move, because after e takes d5, bishop b5, check, knight c6, and d4, we are getting a position with the knight qp on d5, with the knight on c3 already attacking it. So this is a good version for white, so c5 is not a good option for black. Now we go back, and let's start our exploration with the Rubinstein preference. Let's say d takes e4, knight takes e4, and now knight d7. The alternatives are obviously worse. For example, knight f6 directly after knight f6, queen f6, d4 already threatens bishop g5 and bishop d3 to trap the queen, and after bishop d3, let's say h6, bishop d3, white already has a advantage in development. So this is a bad line for black that can also rise from the normal French, and pretty much nobody plays it. Similarly, c5 is not very good, because after d4, cd4, queen d4, knight d4, threatening knight b5, and after, let's say, a6, bishop f4, threatening knight d6, white already has an advantage in the endgame, as he will win the bishop pair. So normally the Rubinstein player would play knight d7 with the idea of knight f6. And now there is nothing wrong with going d4, knight f6, and transpose to the Rubinstein French. Okay, But the assumption is that the black player is prepared for this. This is part of their repertoire, so we want to avoid it. Yeah. So what I came up with a rare plan in this position, still trying to steer the game clear of let's say usual or prepared territory, and that plan starts with the move bishop c4. Okay, there is another interesting idea that I think it's worth mentioning that starts with the move b3. You can explore this on your own, but I think bishop c4 is a bit, let's say, a more precise way to implement the b3 idea, and this is going to be our main idea. We will try to avoid d4 and play b3, bishop b2, and queen e2 with long castle. So this already gives the game quite an original flair. So knight f6, black follows the plan, knight takes f6, knight takes f6, and now queen e2. So we are starting the plan. We have a fly here, got away. Okay, sorry about that. Queen e2, and now we're preparing b3 and bishop b2. So to illustrate how this works, let's say c5. We can go short castle now also, and after bishop e7, b3, short castle, bishop b2, and at some point d4 will happen when white will have a very nice bishops, rook d1, and will generally play either on with a knight on e5, will generally play on the queen side a4, a5, and so forth. So this is one option, but there is also a more aggressive option. Let's say bishop e7, b3, castles, bishop b2. And now in case of something like b6, g4 is already very strong. Yeah, obviously knight g4, rook g1 would be fantastic for white. And if bishop b7, g5, knight d5, rook g1, and with long castle coming, h4, h5, h6, yeah, the bishop's kind of, especially the dark squared one, looking towards the king side, knight d5, knight g4 ideas, knight f6, knight h6, something like that happening. It's looking very promising. For example, let's say knight f4, queen e5, attacking the knight h5, trying to defend the g7 square against mate, and now queen c3, getting away from the exposed position, and then long castle comes, and already white really has quite a promising attack. So this idea, rare idea, yeah, withholding d4 and playing with b3, I think it's pretty well good enough to confuse the Rubinstein French players. So now that was de4. Now let's move on to the, let's say, the hardcore French approach with knight f6. This is an approach that a player who plays the classical French, for example, would go for, and also maybe a player who just insists on French structures. And now, after this, play becomes pretty forcing. So e5, knight fd7, d4, c5. Yeah, so we do have the French structure, but you will see the structure will soon be changed, and we will obtain pretty good position with free piece play. Now dc5 is the move I think should be played, even though knight e2 is quite interesting. Knight c6, c3, and this line can actually arise from the Steinitz variation on the classical French, which arises after, I'll just show you, okay, d4, d5, let's say knight c3, knight f6, e5, knight fd7, yeah, and now again, knight f3, c5, knight e2, yeah, or more frequently, knight ce2, c5, knight f3, knight c6, and c3. This is actually quite playable, and I've looked at this. It's underestimated, and I think it's a good try, yeah, especially after some research by white. So, okay, let's go back. So, knight f6, e5, knight d7, d4, c5. Like I said, knight d2 is possible, but dc5 is simpler. So, knight c6, or bishop c5, bishop d3 won't change. Both moves will be played. Knight c6, bishop f4, defending the pawn on e5. So, bishop c5, and now bishop d3. So, this is the let's say, one of the main, I think, attractions of this system for white, because very quickly white obtains this smooth development of the light pieces, easy development with good central control. So there is very little necessity for let's say opening preparation or memorization of any forcing lines. Now in this position, the main move for black is f6, because that is the only way for black to create any counterplay. Against any other move, just short castle happens, and then white has really comfortable play. So for example, let's say h6, avoiding some Greek gift sacrifices after bishop h7, let's say bishop g3, and then white continues with short castle, then queen e2 or rook e1, controlling the e5 and defending prophylactically the e5 outpost. And then play will simply continue on the king side, maybe h4, h5. Maybe the knight from f3 can move, yeah, for example, I don't know, knight d2 to allow for queen g4, and so forth. So if black doesn't undermine white's center, white uses the e5 outpost, very strong pawn on e5, to as a basis starting point for play on the king side. Worth noting is that black cannot really take a pawn, so queen b6, attacking f2 and b2, but after short castle, queen b2 is bad, as after knight b5, very bad things happen to black, as also the queen is short of squares and can be trapped, but also knight c7 and knight d6 coming up. So the pawn is poisoned. That's why black normally plays f6 in this position. White takes on f6, and now black can take with either queen or knight, but the good point from white's point of view is that both recaptures lead to the same pawn structure, and white can actually follow the same plan. So knight f6, like, okay, but we can check queen f6 as well. And now we can go bishop g5, or we can go bishop g3. Yeah, both are possible. Let's say bishop g3, castles, and we get the same structure. Or let's say bishop g5, attacking the queen, queen f7, and now castles, and now bishop h4, dropping the bishop back to g3, controlling the e5 square. And the plan will be the same as after knight f6, yeah, the knight a4 and c4 attacking black's center. So we will take a look at this plan in more detail via the knight f6 move order. So knight f6, castles, and now a bit of a background perhaps. Actually, I kind of was inspired to take a look at this line, as I remembered actually that Boris Spassky used this line to beat Tigran Petrosyan in their World Championship match in 1966. And I thought, well, if it was good enough for Spassky and a World Championship match, it should probably be good for us today, as we can build up the variation with some computer moves and analyze it to a greater depth. And actually, I wasn't surprised, because, like I said, there is no advantage, but play for white is really simple and straightforward. So this is the moment where we can actually improve on Spassky's play. In this position, he played the move knight e5, but after bishop d7, black was okay, as after knight c6, which is again is probably suboptimal, bishop c6, black was really doing fine, even though, like I said, white eventually won the game. So instead of knight e5, we just drop the bishop back to g3, avoiding any issues on the f file. And now the plan for white, as I mentioned, is really simple. The knight moves from c3, whether that be to a4, attacking the bishop on c5, or to e2, and white follows up with c4 to attack black's center. The idea is to either force the advance of the d pawn, which will give white nice blockade all over the light squares, d3 and e4, and would give white a queenside majority of ABC against AB on the queen side. Or in case of d takes c4, bishop c4, then there will be a weak pawn on e6. Or if black allows c takes d5, then after e takes d5, there will be this IQP on d5, which can be blockaded, attacked, in addition to white's queenside majority A and B. No, actually there won't be any majority. AB will remain, but there will be an IQP on d5. So to illustrate, yeah, let's say bishop d7, for continuing development, knight a4, attack that bishop, bishop draws back c4, and there we have it. So cd5 can happen, not immediately. White can start with knight c3, luring black to push d4. Yeah, when these pawns will be even more exposed because d3 for there will be a nice blockade, but also black cannot easily play e5 because white also controls the e5 square. Another idea, let's say a6, with the idea to drop the bishop back to a7 perhaps, but now queen knight e2 can happen, and queen e7, c4. Exactly the same, yeah. And knight h5, let's check the third line. Yeah. Going after the bishop, that controls the e5 square, but this doesn't alter white's plan at all. Knight a4, attacking the bishop. Bishop draws back to e7 and c4. So black can get the bishop pair, knight takes g3, h takes g3, and now let's say dc4, bishop c4, queen takes d1, rook a d1, and the endgame is obviously extremely safe for white and much easier to play. So rook e1 will happen, black is saddled with a weak pawn on e6, white has a good access to the e5 square in front of it, even though black can fight for it with bishop f6 and so forth. But generally speaking, it's much easier to play with white here, as black is doomed to passivity. The bishop pair doesn't mean much, especially as that bishop on c8 is forced to stay on c8 and defend that pawn on e6. So there you have it. This was the French structure that black can force, but I think the easiness of white's play more than compensates for allowing the hardcore French player obtain their structure. And now we move on to the theoretically most critical move for black, and that is the move d4. Okay, attacking the knight. Knight drops back to e2, attacking the pawn on d4. And now black should play the move c5. The other moves are worse. For example, let's say knight c6 defends the pawn, but after c3, black can no longer maintain the pawn, let's say, equality in the center, because let's say e5, cd4, ed4, and now queen a4, there are problems with the defense of the d4 pawn, but also white has already a pawn majority in the center. So that's one suboptimal move. Another suboptimal move is knight f6, even though it is possible, but after e5, knight fd7, knight ed4, knight e5, knight e5, queen d4, and knight f3, we do have the Rubinstein structure, but one where black has wasted time with the queen. Okay, so let's say queen d8, d4, and already the queen has wasted a lot of time, and white has really smooth development. Bishop comes to e3, bishop d3, queen e2, long castle, and still sides for an attack on the queen side with g4, g5, knight e5, and so forth. So again, this is a possible way for black, but one where it's a suboptimal version. That's why c5 is the move to play. And here, I think the simplest is the move knight g3, just freeing the path for the light squared bishop, even though you can explore let's say the wing sort of gambit with b4. So you can check this. It leads to some interesting play. I'll just give you a sample line. Let's say knight c6, b5, knight c7, knight g3, knight f6, and bishop c4. And then white goes d3, castles, yeah, with quite a complex position. Yeah, so you can just explore this if you feel like playing it. I think knight g3 is just simpler. Yeah. And now again, black's best move here is the move h5. So first of all, this has nothing to do with the usual French. The structure is quite different. Okay. And second, okay, even getting to this position to play the move h5, even though we are more used to it nowadays than earlier, still requires some sort of, let's say, knowledge or, well, some preparation. I would say the more normal move you can expect is knight c6. Yeah, and here the first important moment about this structure for white is that white should get rid of the light squared bishop. So bishop b5 before playing d3. Okay, obviously not d3 immediately because there is a queen a5 check and the bishop can fall, but white gladly gives up the bishop for the knight. So let's say bishop d7, takes on c6, takes on c6, and knight e5. The idea of knight e5 is to rob black of the advantage of the pair of bishops, even though in this close position they don't mean much. So, for example, queen c7, take on c6, queen c6, and d3. So the position is equal, of course, But white has really easy play. Okay, short castle, f4, f5, or e5, depending on circumstances. Yeah, white has a good bishop, not being constrained by his pawn chain, and very easy play. Equal position, but easy play. And again, I keep repeating this, nothing to do with the French defense. So that's knight c6. I would think if black is not prepared and gets to this position, that's the move that they would normally play. But let's check h5. Yeah, it is after all the engine's suggested move. And you will notice if you run this with an engine, you will notice that the engine prefers black's chances, gives black some sort of a tiny advantage. But this is only at the beginning. If you just let the engine run to really great depths, it gets almost to equality. So this simply means that the engine likes space advantage, which black has in this case. But as I said, the easiness of play and pretty straightforward way of white's plans, I think more than compensate for this, let's say, psychological disadvantage of playing a position where the engine gives, I don't know, 0.13 or whatever in black's favor. So h5, and now the move bishop b5 check. Like I said, the idea is to get rid of the light squared bishop. So check, so that later on white can play d3 and finish development. So just to, let's say, bishop d7, even though knight d7 is better. Yeah, but again, it's not so easy to play like this. Yeah, so bishop d7, take on d7, queen d7, and now white basically needs to decide what to do against h4, attacking the knight, and then h3. There are two options, whether to go h3 or to go h4. Both are possible, yeah, and let's say h3 in this position, even though, like I said, h4 is also possible. So knight c6, d3, long castle, short castle, yeah. Quite a complex position. White is very solid, obviously, a better bishop, yeah, solid pawn structure, and can obviously try to start playing on the queen side, maybe bishop d2, a3, b4, b1, and so forth. Yeah. On the king side, also maybe move the knight from f3, go f4, depending, yeah, on circumstances. So complex position, mutual chances. But as I mentioned, knight d7 is better. And now again, h3 or h4, yeah. Here h4 is slightly better. Yeah. And after a6, bishop d7, d3, yeah, knight f6 and bishop f4, for example. This has already been played by Daniel Dubov this year. So there you go. You have an original thinker employing this variation. It was played in an online game, but still. So complex position at the end, yeah. Chances for both sides, but like I said, the main attraction of this variation for white is that in case black plays the most critical line, which is d4, the game steers very far from the French defense, which I think already is a psychological victory for the white player. So there you have it. This is my sabotage the French idea. I hope you liked it. So I noticed that last video had some sort of sound issues. I hope they're not repeated in this one, but apologies, I can't do much about it. This is the setup and equipment I have right now, so well, I hope you can still listen through the whole video without being too upset about the sound issues. So guys, thanks for watching, and make sure you subscribe to this channel. And yeah, as always, tell me what you think in the comments and spread the word, subscribe, and keep on watching. So thanks again, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.